Today is Tuesday, May 10th, 2016. It's 5:30 p.m. I will convene the joint work session of the Oregon City Commission and the Oregon City Plan Commission. First item up is PC 16-055, Equitable Affordable Housing. Mr. Conkle.
Thank you,
I'm not
Mayor.
used to seeing you over there. It confuses me.
Thank you, Mayor. Evening, City Commissioners and Planning Commissioners. I thank you for taking the time to come out at this joint work session of the Planning Commission and the City Commission. So at our goals update that we had with our City Commission earlier this year, as we went through the achievements that we made over the last year in terms of the goals that the Commission had set, a discussion, one of the points that came up for discussion was affordable housing. And where is Oregon City at in terms of affordable housing? There were a lot of questions about the development that we've seen throughout the years. How do we handle accessory dwelling units? What are we doing as a local jurisdiction, and what other programs are out there? In the 15 years I've been here, I think this is the first time I can remember a conversation such as this occurring in Oregon City that specifically talks about affordable housing. So when I went back with the planning staff and we started to talk about what can we do. I had some conversations with representatives from Clackamas County, and I appreciate County Minister Krupp and Mr. Swift from Health and Human Services being here tonight to help us with this presentation as well. Of where are we at? Where are we in Clackamas County? Where are we in Oregon City? What are options that are available to us? And really, I'm hoping that tonight is an opportunity for us all to hear the information and start to consider it. We're not asking for a specific direction other than we do have a Metro grant opportunity that is due at the end of this week that we would like to discuss a little bit as well, and you'll hear more information about that tonight. So really this is, I think, the opportunity to ask some of those basic questions, hear kind of where we're at, what we've been able to identify. I envision, multiple more discussions about this, and as we move forward and try to come up with what are the options available to us, and what steps do we want to take, if any, in having that discussion at both the Planning Commission and the City Commission level, and it could be larger than that once we start to think about what we want to try to accomplish. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to
let me break in here real quick. So tonight we have a fairly full agenda, and there are a lot of people who are going to want to talk. So I'm going to take my authority as mayor to limit not only the audience but my fellow commissioners and planning commissioners to 3 minutes on a subject so that we can make sure we all get through this. So will you please set the timer for each person?
Okay.
Thank you. Now, that doesn't include the presentation, I assume. Do we know how much time
we're going to fast, but it's not going to be 3 minutes. No. Did we have time limit? I think we had kind of about 30, 45 minutes.
An hour, 45 minutes to an hour for presentations on housing.
Let's keep it closer to 45 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Dan, may I have a minute just for a point of history?
Sure.
So, Tony, just for your information, in the 90s, we had a continuing conversation with Clackamas County about housing, was titled Fair Share, and we were talking to all the cities and the unincorporated area folks about housing and how we provide affordable housing for Clackamas County. So I'm glad to see that we're having a continuing conversation about that topic, because we have been in discussions with the county prior about this particular issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McGriff. Sir, if you'd introduce yourself.
Yes, I will. Mr. Mayor, members of the commissions, my name is John Stutzman. I'm a planner here at Oregon City, and I just want to provide you a very short introduction and let you know that we have a number of guests here who are really the experts in housing and will tell you more about the grant program as well as the county efforts. To start off, I would like to let you know that beyond my short introduction, we're going to have Emily Lieb, who's a project manager with Metro. She's going to do a PowerPoint presentation for us, and really hopefully to give you more of a regional perspective on housing and all the efforts that Metro has been undergoing to deal with this issue with all its member cities and counties. And next will be Richard Swift and his staff. They have a very short focused presentation to give you more of a local perspective, county perspective, and really talk about that the city and the county have been talking about this issue more recently and seeing if there are opportunities to partner on a grant application to Metro. There might be benefits both ways. And so again, we just want to, more than anything, is provide information for you. And as been mentioned already, I'm relatively new to the city, but I feel that this, whether you want to call it affordable or any kind of housing, is really part, what I feel, of the city's livability goal of how do we provide adequate housing for all our different populations. I know there's been discussions both within the county and the city of how we deal with everything from the homelessness issue all the way up to people trying to find rental homes or apartments in the city. And I think what it really comes down for you, I would say from my perspective as a planner, is, what is the proper role for the city in this whole housing issue? What can we do? What should we do? And I hope tonight from the speakers that you hear, they'll give you a better understanding of what's being done regionally, locally, and perhaps how the city can fit into that mix. And so with that short introduction, Mr. Bear, I'd like to invite Emily Lieb to come up and go through her presentation for you.
So I assume that everybody knows that there's a little switch that you can switch to presentation mode. I don't think you guys have monitors, so you can, you're facing the screen, which is handy. So.
So we have to watch it. That's what we're doing.
Oh, so you all have screens. Okay, great. Sorry, we're just waiting for this to look everyone else. Well, thank you all so much for having me today. Again, I'm Emily Lieb. I'm a senior project manager with Metro, and I manage our Equitable Housing Initiative, which is a new program at Metro that was created a year ago as a result of our council seeing how many cities across the region have been talking about housing issues and trying to identify what role we can play as a regional government in providing resources, convening discussions around this issue. So I wanted to share some information about how we're approaching this issue regionally. I've got a little bit of regional data to share that I think will help frame your conversation today. And then wanted to talk a little about this grant program that we're launching. And we have a pre-application meeting coming up this Friday. There's a little more time in terms of the application process. Applications aren't due till August, but we are asking for letters of interest in June. So to get started, we started a year ago in 2015 with a research and engagement process looking at trying to build a shared understanding of opportunities and challenges for equitable housing, looking at short and long-term opportunities, both at the local level, regional, state policy, and really trying to think about how we could frame a broader conversation about housing so that we're not talking about homelessness in one silo and workforce development in another, but really thinking holistically about a full range of housing types and how we provide access to housing in places that provides all of the other amenities and opportunities that we want people to have. So we know there's no one-size-fits-all approach to the issue. We're not trying to package a toolkit that we want to be replicated in the same way in every community, but rather to provide information and resources that are useful for local decision making. So I'm going to start with a little regional data, market analysis. This is looking at cumulative change in rents and incomes across the 7-county metro region. And so the blue lines show the change in apartment rents in the solid line, and the dotted line is the change in renter incomes. So you can see over the past 10 years, renter incomes have increased 39%, while rents have increased 63%. And this is not just a Portland issue. This is something we're seeing all across the region. What's also interesting, if you look at on the ownership side, it is not the case yet that at the regional level, ownership prices are outpacing incomes. I think that would be the case if you looked in certain parts of the region that are the most in demand for sale homes, definitely in inner Portland and in some other communities and places around the region. But at the regional scale, the rental housing is really what's kind of consistent across the board. So every 4 years, Metro does an inventory of regulated or subsidized affordable housing across the region. We just completed a new inventory. We worked with all the jurisdictions across the region, with the Clackamas Housing Authority, to gather data on both federally funded and also any locally funded subsidized housing programs or regulated. What that came out to was around 30,000 units of regulated affordable housing across the region, and we have that data available and can share it with you if you're interested. But we also wanted to look at naturally occurring affordable housing, so housing that, for reasons of its location or its age, is or has become affordable over time. And that's based on a definition of affordability, that a household can afford to spend about 30% of their income in rent. So if we look at incomes across the region and median income, we see that there are about 72,000 units of market rate housing that is naturally affordable to people making less than 60% of median income. And then we have, more housing that's available more in the 60 to 100% of AMI, what some communities might call workforce housing. So just looking at these numbers and looking at the number of renter households in the region that fall into those income categories, we have a shortage of about 80,000 units of housing that's affordable to households making less than 60% of median income. So this is a map showing a percentage increase in rent from 2011 to 2015 across the region. And so you can see there's not any place on the map where rents did not increase. Oregon City, the increase was about 20%, which is Milwaukee, Gladstone, Oregon City combined, which is pretty in line with other areas on the east side of the region. Most dramatic increases in Portland, and particularly in North Portland, where rents went up 71%. And then we also wanted to look at, and I think this is included in your packet, I also have some colorful copies, but we wanted to look at what does that mean in terms of income levels in our region. So we have a kind of fun infographic that we put together, and I have a few extra copies that I'll leave here today if anyone's interested. Just looking at average salaries and where people with those salaries can afford to live. So this map is showing households making median income, the percentage of homes, rental units that are affordable to that household. And we were looking at a 3-person household, so we were looking at 2 bedrooms affordable to a 3-person household making around $32,000. So that means they can afford $800 in rent, and as you can see, very few, the percentages here range from 1% to 8%. And Oregon City, we have 5.6% of units affordable to a household making less than half of median income. And again, we are looking at your preschool teacher or the combined income of 2 people making a minimum wage. And then we wanted to look at where a household making median income can afford to buy a home. So if we think about kind of first-time home ownership opportunities, and the salaries in this range would be a police officer or a high school teacher. Again, looking at a 3-person household, looking for 2 to 3 bedroom homes that sold in the last 5 years for, we looked at a sale price of $290,000. And so if you look at that, you'll see that the region is still largely affordable to households making median income. Maybe not the case in Inner Portland, but other parts of the region we really do have a relatively affordable, compared to other West Coast cities, stock of for sale homes. Sorry. So over the past year, we convened a series of roundtables in partnership with Oregon Opportunity Network, which is an umbrella organization for housing authorities and nonprofit housing developers. We also conducted focus groups with private developers to talk about things like inclusionary zoning and get their perspectives. We conducted a market analysis, and you saw some of the findings from that, and convened a work group to develop a framework, which I'm going to share briefly. And then in February, we convened a leadership summit and shared these results and published a full report, and I think the link to that was also in your packet. And before I jump into that, I just wanted to, the reason we've used equitable housing rather than affordable housing is because we're really trying to define this as broadly as possible, as not only affordable housing, but diverse, quality, physically accessible housing with access to opportunities, amenities, and services. So we haven't only been talking about subsidized affordable housing, but also thinking about things like missing middle housing, which would include cottage clusters, accessory dwelling units, kind of smaller housing options that are tend to be more affordable. And so the framework that we that came out of that research process, and this is detailed much more in the report, is a four-part framework that represents kind of a balanced approach to equitable housing. And within each of these four strategy areas, we've identified a number of tools, many of which would be implemented by local jurisdictions. Others reflect things that would be implemented by other sectors like nonprofits or foundations or developers. And we really think this is an issue that requires a collaborative approach. So the four strategies are one, increase and diversify market rate housing by eliminating regulatory barriers and creating incentives for more diverse market rate housing. Two, leverage growth for affordability. We do this by encouraging private developers to encourage to the supply of, to contribute to the supply of affordable housing. And this is really a strategy that's most appropriate in really strong market areas. So the example, the kind of big example there would be inclusionary zoning in Portland. But we can also think about this more broadly in terms of how do we leverage all of our other investments in catalytic projects, transit, economic development. How do we leverage those opportunities to create housing opportunities so that when we're making investments, they are benefiting existing community members? The third strategy is maximize and optimize resources. And so this is about looking at the full range of funding that's available, from federal funding to state funding to local funding opportunities to private sector and foundations to develop coordinated strategies for investing in subsidized affordable housing. And finally, mitigate displacement and stabilize communities, which is last not because it's the least important, but because it really overlaps with everything else we're talking about. And this is about community-informed strategies to prevent displacement. And so the tools we identified in this category really fall into two categories. The first are tenant protection tools, and these are a lot of the kind of short-term measures that we're seeing cities across the region taking to prevent displacement as a result of rising rents and no-cause evictions. City of Milwaukee, for example, just declared a state of emergency and passed a measure that requires 3 months' notice for a no-cause eviction. So that's one side, one category of tools. The other is more long-term community-based strategies for in providing a range of housing choices and increasing access to homeownership. So looking at strategies like community land trusts. And we do have a regional community land trust called Proud Ground that works to partner with local jurisdictions to invest in permanently affordable homeownership opportunities. Just a little slide at our summit. We had Seattle Mayor Ed Murray speak, and over 240 attendees from a range of sectors. I don't know that we came to regional consensus about regional solutions, but it's something we're going to be continuing to explore in terms of regional policy agenda and regional resource development strategies to increase the pool of funding available for affordable housing and provide more coordination. We've also talked as a regional opportunity about regional opportunities for land banking or land acquisition or things that it's very difficult for small jurisdictions to do on their own. So are there regional economies of scale that we could explore? So those are things that we'll be exploring at the regional scale. But in the meantime, we wanted to our counselors really wanted to be investing in local implementation of work that leads to housing development. So one opportunity we identified is we have this regional construction excise tax that funds local planning grants, and Oregon City has gotten those in the past, and I think has at least one for Willamette Falls right now. And that funding is for local planning that eliminates barriers to development. So we had unallocated revenue from the last cycle of grants, which was the fourth cycle of grants that we gave out, and we also had higher than anticipated construction excise tax revenue because there's been so much building happening. So our council decided to allocate some of that funding to what's basically a demonstration program round of grants to provide grants for local planning projects that eliminate barriers to equitable housing. And we have identified two different categories of projects that we think would qualify for this. The first are site identification and analysis work. So that could be doing an inventory of publicly owned land to identify sites for feasibility analysis for affordable housing. It could be working with a site owner and a developer, whether that's a nonprofit developer or another developer, to do any level of pre-development work on the site to analyze the development feasibility and develop an action development strategy for that site. The other category of work is around policy implementation that eliminates barriers. So looking at zoning or code changes to missing middle housing, so things like cottage clusters, accessory dwelling units, division of larger homes into multiple units, or looking at the implementation of an incentive or a regulatory program like inclusionary zoning. You could also do voluntary inclusionary zoning. You could look at parking requirements in specific zones, or I really think it's going to vary quite a bit from one community to the next. And then finally looking at implementation of streamlined permitting if that's one of the barriers to equitable development. So the timeline for that is we're asking for letters of interest by June 8th. We have a pre-application meeting this Friday to provide more information. We'll be asking for applications by August 12th. The grant awards will be the decisions we made in the fall. We'll have a screening committee evaluating proposals and making recommendation to our COO and Metro Council, and they'll make a final decision in November. And then we're hoping to negotiate IGAs by January, and work could get started in 2017. And I guess that's all I had. And the other thing that we're launching is a equitable housing lunch and learn series. And I know missing middle housing came up. One The first brown bag that we're having is on May 27th, or June 27th, sorry, and we haven't sent out the announcement for this yet, with Eli Spivak, who is a private developer who does a lot of co-housing communities and has done a statewide analysis of code barriers to missing middle housing, and created some case studies of different projects looking at cottage clusters, ADUs, division of larger homes into multiple units, and one other housing type that I'm forgetting. But and I think we're also looking at whether we could get him to do some other events, like maybe a missing middle tour of housing around the region. And I think looking at ways we could connect him to, there seem to be a lot of cities that are interested in the issue of ADUs and some of the other missing middle. So we're going to continue to explore the best way to support that work. And finally, we have a new program at Metro called our Regional Snapshots, which is really kind of data and storytelling around key issues. And so last fall, we released our first snapshot report about housing, and we'll have another one coming up this fall. And these are just a few quotes from interviews with residents around the region. We have lots of great stories on that website, and also a link where people can go and share their housing story. And we're also gathering kind of really good, compelling data. So that's at oregonmetro.gov/snapshot. So I think I'm going to turn it over back to John for our next speaker, but I'm going to stick around if there are questions about the grant program. Thanks again.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to request that Richard Swift and come up and start the county's presentation.
Okay. So before Richard starts, for those of you who have system consoles, in order for me to be, because I can't see everybody, there's a request to speak button when you go on the agenda page, or on the floor actually. So if you wish to speak, go back here, and there's a request to speak button. They are touchscreen monitors, or you can use your mouse either way. So if you do that, it does keep the agenda rolling. If you'd introduce yourself, sir.
Sure. My name is Richard Swift. I'm the Director of Health, Housing, and Human Services for Clackamas County. And I have with me on my left Chuck Robbins, who is the Director for Housing, the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, and also Community Development. And I'm actually going to stand up here in a little bit and go back in the audience because I'm going to ask Brendan Durbin, who is Director of Social Services for H3S. That's the acronym for Health, Housing, and Human Services, because that's a bit of a mouthful. To come up and also talk with the Commission. So I appreciate very much the opportunity you all have given me to, and my staff, to come in here and talk to you about housing and houselessness. And our focus actually is on Oregon City. We've done a fair amount of data pools in terms of what is going on in Oregon City right now in regards to housing, housing insecurity, homelessness. I'm hoping that you all have a copy of this sheet. Yep. I'm not going to spend a lot of time referring to it. I think the statistics that are highlighted in this are pretty sobering. You know, it is, I think, a good thing for us to be reconvening, as Commissioner McGriff talked about, a conversation that started in the 90s. Because it's, I think, high time for us to be talking about this again. You know, Commissioner Smith and I, met across the table in regards to the Forest Edge and Berry Hill issues that were happening in the winter. And that was actually, I think, an excellent sign of the collaboration that was happening between the county and the city, Oregon City, in terms of that response. 28 families who were essentially slid out of their residences as a result of that slide. And right now we've got 27 of them back in stable and secure housing, which is a fair accomplishment when you consider the situation that's happening in this region in regards to housing. Some of the stats are pretty sobering. When I looked at this, I saw, at first I thought, well, renters are experiencing an income increase of 39% across the last 4 years from 2010 to 2014. But then when I juxtapose that next to a increase in rates for rental costs of almost 70%, then that increase is being eaten up in terms of housing costs. And we are seeing this from Milwaukee down to Canby, down to Wilsonville, and across the entire county. And it's pretty sobering. And actually, and that's why, you know, we're talking about the demographic of housing insecurity, because we have a slug of our residents in this county and in Oregon City that are faced with some pretty tough choices in terms of how much money to allot toward their housing versus how much money to allot towards their food and et cetera. It's a lot of stressed out families out there. Chuck is going to talk to you in a minute about some of the work that we are doing in our housing authority, you know, specifically 2 properties that, you know, many of you may be familiar with, which are Clackamas Heights up on Holcomb, and then also Oregon City View Manor up on Holcomb. We've been working with HUD, Housing and Urban Development, in regards to those 2 sites, and specifically because I think the first site was built, what, 1938?
1938.
1938. We are spending more and more money on maintenance of those units. So 100 units at Clackamas Heights and 100 units at Oregon City View Manor. We've gotten to the point now where we actually can't afford the maintenance. And we've submitted the necessary paperwork to HUD to let them know that that is our situation. And we are now actually beginning to look at what are our next options, and we would like to involve Oregon City in that conversation, because what we're looking at are 2 20-acre parcels. Also, what Chuck is going to talk about is the the continuum of housing that we look at when we are talking about the populations that H3S works with. So, you know, we are very interested in siting a permanent shelter somewhere in the county. We do not have permanent shelter in this county at this point. What we have right now is temporary shelters in response to cold temperatures, and this is a very arbitrary setting, but right now we will move to temporary sheltering when it gets to 32 degrees and bad weather. I'm not exactly sure what the difference between 32 degrees and say 45 degrees or 57 degrees is. You know, the human body really can't tolerate getting wet in 57 degrees for any length of time before it's hypothermia. We're also looking at tiny houses option, you know, because we really are dealing with a population of folk and populations of people, some who cannot enter into the mainstream economy. That may be for traumatic brain injury, that might be due to developmental disability, any number of different reasons. And so we're looking at what is the cafeteria of housing that we can bring to meet the different housing needs of people where they are. You know, some of this is going to be housing first, meaning, and a lot of it is housing first, where the direction for us is looking at stabilizing people in housing, then dealing with addictions issues, then dealing with mental health issues. The data we have is fairly explicit in terms of it is very difficult to stabilize folks if they don't have a roof over their head. We're also looking at what are the opportunities to move people from supported housing into housing that they're paying for themselves. Chuck has some extremely successful programs in helping people save money so they can move into self-sufficiency. Also, very successful programs in terms of supporting people where they're at. And actually, I would like to, if folks haven't come out to see the different properties that the Housing Authority operates, I'd invite folks to come out and see that. I'm also, you know, one of our affordable housing operations just north of Clackamas Town Center, Easton Ridge. We just engaged in an extremely successful renovation of that property. I'd also love to have people come out and tour that. I mean, it really is a remarkable turnaround in terms of a property that was pretty derelict. But what I want to do is stop here, and I want to turn it over to Chuck to talk about the different options that the Housing Authority offers. You know, some of the work that we're looking at in terms of planning, and then, as I said, I'm going to get up. I'm going to have Brenda come up here. She can introduce herself real quick, and she can talk also about, because part of it is bricks and sticks in terms of having housing that is available for people to live in, but also we also offer supportive services so that people can sustain their housing so they can remain in it, because we do work with individuals who have mental illness. They're stabilized, but we need to continue to be working with folks on that. Also with addictions issues, they sometimes will need continued services. We have a very successful partnership with Central City Concern. They put in a 60-unit complex right near also Clackamas Town Center, not far actually from Easton Ridge. That's, I believe, going to be in August, isn't it?
Opening in August,
Yep.
alcohol and drug-free housing.
Yep, for 60 families, but really positive, really nice looking, and also we would love to have the Planning Commission, the City Commission come out and take a look at that property. So I will stop talking at you, let Chuck get started, and make room for Brenda.
All right. Thanks, Rich. So Chuck Robbins, I'm with Housing and Community Development. That involves the Housing Authority. Oregon City is a pretty important player in the Housing Authority because you have almost 266 of the public housing units in our total portfolio, which amounts to 545 units. So I don't really have a presentation. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit, and then we'll do a Merv Griffin kind of show here, and she can jump in and say yes, explain some of the work that social services does, and then we'll just kind of talk about some directions, some opportunities, and I'd love to answer some questions. But first, let me let you introduce yourself.
Hi. I'm Brenda Durbin. I'm the Director of Clackamas County Social Services. We run a number of programs that assist people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness to find housing. We also provide the support services that people need in order to address any issues that are impacting their ability to maintain housing and develop that sort of resiliency so people can sort of overcome challenges as they experience them in their lives.
So first of all, I don't know whether or not you received copies of housing terms. We did. All right, so this is a document that's been kind of evolving. I've been asked to present to a number of different organizations, and I've always been surprised the lack of understanding of just what all the terms are that I take for granted, that I use in my vocabulary all the time. And there's just a couple that I wanted to point out. The first is, affordable housing. When people talk about affordable housing, really all they're talking about is housing that is affordable to somebody at a particular income, meaning that they're going to pay less than 30% of their income for rent and utilities. So an apartment that costs $5,000 a month to rent is affordable to somebody who's making $17,000 a month. But so when people say that they're going to build affordable housing in your community, the real question you ask is affordable to who? Because that's really is going to get at the type of housing that's going to be coming into your community. The other housing is subsidized housing. Everybody understands what market housing is. Market housing is just housing that a contractor gets a loan from the bank, builds, and they rent at the market rents. And it costs a certain amount of dollars per unit. Well, affordable housing, or what people call affordable housing, is really just subsidized housing. That means it's market housing that has received grants or no interest loans or something like that to reduce the debt service on the property so that they can afford to charge less rent to individuals. So now it becomes affordable to people at a lower income category. So that's just rent restricted is really rent subsidized housing that has restrictions on how high the rent can go. So the other term I wanted to just make sure that you're comfortable with is this whole conversation of area median income. That's the term that HUD, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, uses to distinguish between different income categories. So I think on the second page or the back side that there's a chart there. So if you look at a family household size of 1, 100% of median income, that's the median income. That means half the residents in the community are above that, half are below that. So for a family of 1, it's $51,500. We then start moving into low income, which is 80%. That's kind of the workforce housing area. Anything above 80% income, market rent takes care of that. So market developers can do that. When we start getting into the very low or lower income, so that's 50% and 60%, so for a household of one, that would be $25,700. That's where we start needing the subsidized housing and the rent restrictions, so that they can afford to live in these housing. And then the area that Brenda and I spend most of our life with is people that are at the extremely low income range. That means they're making less than 30%. For those individuals, they can't even afford just to live in rent-restricted housing because they still don't make enough money. What they are going to need is a rent-restricted housing and a voucher or some other form of rent subsidy. So those are the key components. And I'm going to just say one other thing, turn it over to Brenda, and then we'll talk some projects. But I want to tell you that the easiest thing in housing is actually building the housing. The toughest thing is finding property. And the second toughest thing is making sure that the residents of these properties have the services that they need in order to be successful, particularly if you're dealing with people at the 30% and 50%. And that's where the partnership with social services is just so important. Housing Authority, we're really good property managers. We are not very good social service people. And dealing with people's problems, it's really easy for us. You have a problem, we evict you. But if you get evicted from the Housing Authority, you're probably homeless, because we're the end. So that's why we work so closely with Brenda. And she's got a number of programs that she can talk about.
Great. Thanks, Chuck. So yes, Chuck mentioned we run a number of programs that help people maintain that housing. At any given time, we have the ability to assist 87 households, and these are folks who maybe just need some short-term subsidy, all the way to people who need something called permanent supportive housing, which is where they need ongoing rent subsidies and ongoing case management. But most of the folks fall somewhere in the middle, where they've fallen on some hard time. Maybe they have some education that they need to catch up on. Maybe they need some job training. So for those folks in sort of the transitional housing world, they'll get 1 to 2 years of help paying their rent, and also that case management assistance. Most of our programs also come with some support dollars, so we can help people get their GED or get a training certificate, deal with some health issues or some mental health issues, so they're able to really take care of themselves in the future. So of those 87 households, currently right now we have 23 households who are residing in Oregon City. Most of our programs rely on the market rate housing that Chuck is talking about. So our folks have to compete with everyone else in this region who is trying to find a place to live. In addition, they maybe have some, maybe a criminal background, or maybe some unpaid debt that needs to be resolved. So they're not necessarily going to be maybe the first person that a landlord rents to when they have maybe 50 or 60 people applying for their apartment. So what we can bring to the equation is that case management, that assurance that the rent will be paid. And it's great to know how many landlords are willing to work with us and our clients to make sure that they can succeed. So again, most of our folks in Oregon City live in scattered site situations. The Housing Authority does own a 7-unit building that we operate as one of our transitional housing opportunities, and we can serve 6 households at a time at Jackson Place. So in addition to helping individuals through case management and assistance paying their rent, we operate a coordinating housing access line. There are a lot of amazing nonprofits in Clackamas County who are working on this issue in addition to the programs that the county operates. Prior to the advent of our coordinated housing access line, a household in need would maybe call 5 or 6 different agencies. Now we've got one number to call, we triage, we can prioritize, we can make sure that that household that just needs a couple months rent because they've got good employment history, good rental history, they've just fallen on some hard times, get those folks into a short-term program, get the people who are going to need more long-term support in one of our more intensive programs. So it hopefully facilitates entry into the program and connects people to the program that's going to meet their needs. In partnership with Chuck, we also run a housing rights and resources program. This is part of the county's efforts to ensure that the fair housing laws are followed. So we have a phone number, we have a very skilled staff person, and they take calls from both renters and landlords, from property managers, people who feel like they may have been discriminated against, landlords, property owners who want to find out a little bit more about what the rules are. We do a lot of training and education to make sure that there's no discrimination in housing in the county. For some folks, they may have the money that they need to pay their rent, but again, something in their background is preventing them from getting a place to live. So we operate something called the Rent Well program. That's a renter's rights and education program. So it's 6 weeks. Folks go through the class. We have a great completion rate, and when they come out of that class, they've got information, they've got resources, so they can go to the next potential landlord and say, yeah, you know, this happened in the past. This is why my life is different. This is why you should take a chance with me. And we actually have tremendous success. That certificate, that Rent Well certificate, really does mean something to the landlords, and they'll rent to people who maybe they otherwise wouldn't have. And then through partnerships and community, we help fund a variety of different programs, some emergency shelter. We also help to fund the winter warming shelters that Rich mentioned. In Oregon City, you have the Father's Heart Street Ministry, and they are one of the organizations that open their doors during the coldest nights to make sure that people can physically survive during the cold weather. And I think we all wish that we had more capacity so we didn't have to restrict that, because it's just as miserable living outside when it's 40 degrees as when it's 32, but that's what our funds allow us to do at this point in time. So I will stop there.
Okay. So, Mr. Maybe is on the list. Dan?
Yeah, I just had a question. I don't know whether it's for you, Chuck, or for you, Lisa, whatever. But one of the items that keeps coming up is having the developers contributing to the supply of affordable housing. And I guess my question is, what is meant by that? Is it when they're doing their 20-unit subdivision, do they do 5 duplexes so they meet the middle thing? Do they do 25 but they make them smaller so they're less pricey? Or does it mean that they set aside a certain amount of their houses that they're just not going to take a big profit on? Instead of getting 5 or 10%, they're willing to take 0 in a write-off? Or, I mean, what does that mean? What does that look like when I, as a planning commissioner, see a subdivision come across and they say, and it's going to be affordable housing, other than saying affordable to who? Mm-hmm. What should I be looking for?
Well, the quick answer to that is yes, all of those things really do apply. But there's 2 types of developers generally that we talk about when we're dealing with housing. One is the for-profit developer, the D.R. Hortons. They're out there, they buy the property, and they are developing housing, and they're market housing. So, part of the partnership might be the inclusionary zoning. I mean, there's an opportunity to say, okay, if you're going to build, we require that a certain percentage of those be affordable to someone at a certain income limit, and that might be 60 or 80. So as a planning commission, you can be saying that's a policy that we would like the city to address. So there is a way that developers are helping you meet your affordable housing goals. It kind of, though, begins first of all with the city deciding what do we want those goals to be. What type of housing are we looking to build? We're kind of here at this table, we're concerned with the entire continuum of housing, from the houseless all the way to the property owners. We generally work on the lower end of that scale, though, because that's where the greatest need is. But depending on what the city wants to do, then the developer can, you can have the developer help you. The other opportunity is to identify property and say we would like to build a specific type of housing, and then get a nonprofit developer to come out and have the nonprofit developer build.
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
Well, I'm assuming that you guys are going to provide affordable housing based on what's in your buildable lands inventory, correct? I mean, you're going to have all these different jurisdictions do a buildable lands inventory to determine what kind of property you guys have available for affordable housing. Is that kind of how you guys are going to do it? And I guess what I'm getting to is that you're going to have a lot of the buildable lands inventories out on the urban growth boundary, and which is not a real ideal place for affordable housing per se, because you're going to have people away from their services. So what I'm hoping you guys could do is integrate efforts for redevelopment and other types of things in your core to address the affordable housing issue, so that you have what's called a more of a homogeneous income equality issue, where you have people with low income associated with people with higher incomes, so that you don't just have these people with low incomes like you have up in Park Place and other places, segregated in these small, I don't want to say ghettos, but all these small places where they're sequestered away from services that they might benefit from in another place.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's a terrific segue into just some of the conversation I wanted to have about the building opportunities that we have. First of all, Clackamas County, the Board of County Commissioners, has looked at what's available, particularly in the Housing Authority's portfolio, and we've identified a number of development objectives. One of those is that as part of our portfolio, we have public housing. Our public housing is old. 1938, that's the very first public housing built in Oregon, Clackamas Heights. If you've been up there, they're barrack-style housing. They're built on post and beam. They don't even have foundations underneath them. I think Rich mentioned the cost to maintain. We did a physical needs assessment of all 550 public housing units, determined that what it would take to maintain those properties for 20 years at the HUD standard would cost us about $2.3 million a year to maintain those properties. We get less than $900,000 a year from HUD to maintain those properties. So we've got a huge gap. So we have to decide what we're going to do with that property. And that then kind of addresses some of the concerns. The buildable land inventory, a lot of that is what do you have zoned correctly and what's available. The Housing Authority property is not part of that buildable land inventory, but I think it should be. We've got 22 20-acre lots up there, and what we're looking at doing is selling both. And the reason we're doing that is because it's not the best place for public housing. There's really no services up there. We've got pretty good TriMet service up there now, but that's it. We have Steve's Market, and the elementary school. Those are terrific, but that's not really enough to build a community. Plus, we have a high concentration of low-income people, in a very small area. So the board set up a number of goals. One is, if you get rid of a public housing unit, we want to see you develop at least 4 affordable housing units, and that's affordable to people at that 60% and lower, and also ensure that we're including in that units affordable to people at 30%. We're also looking at the deconcentration of housing, and so rather than building it all in one place, we want to build it throughout the county. And we're looking at different size projects. We're looking at 150 unit apartment complexes all the way down to smaller 20 unit apartment complexes. 20 unit is the most exciting, I think, because that's an infill project. You're building, buildable land inventory. We might be able to find an acre and a half someplace and build at 21 units. Expensive, there's not a lot of public money for that, so that becomes the challenge. How do you reduce those costs? Also, it's expensive to operate. Who operates that? Probably would be the Housing Authority, because we're in a position for that. So eventually, we need to sit down with the city, and we need to have that first conversation. What does new development look like on Holcomb? So if we sold Clackamas Heights and Oregon City View Manor, what do? Do we just sell it and move out? Do we reserve a portion of that, take 2 or 3 acres and build some affordable housing. So we still have some housing up there for the people that we're displacing that want to live near the elementary school. And what might that look like? And what would the city like to see up there? Do they want to see row houses? Do they want to see an apartment complex? You know, that's the conversation that we want to have with the city and of course want to have with the neighborhood. And then the reason we sell that housing is because there's value in that land. And if we're going to build any affordable housing projects in Clackamas County, you know, we're going to have to look at the fund sources that are available. Most of those come through the state, low-income housing tax credits. It's one of your, it's in your definition, but basically it is, you know, I won't call it free money because it's not free, but it's more of a grant than it is a loan, so it doesn't have to be repaid.
Okay, so we're running up against the end of this particular piece of our agenda. I've got 4 people on the list that want to speak, so
I'm done.
We'll get to that.
I could talk for hours, so you bring me back.
You're done.
Yeah.
One quick question.
They brought us up in Park Place a while back. They were going to sell their property and build a small high-rise, 4 or 5 stories. Whatever happened to that?
So that was the kind of the total redevelopment of, yeah, so that was under a HUD program called Hope 6. So an application was made. We were not successful with that application, and then they killed the program.
Commissioner McGriff.
Well, you answered the first question because I was too aware of the redevelopment plan that was going to happen. So let me ask the question here. You talked about the 266 units that are in Oregon City. Where are the other 279? Are they in the other cities? And is the county looking at equitably distributing these types of housing units to the other communities in Clackamas County instead of having them all be in Oregon City?
Absolutely. So what we have is we have 4 large parks, 20 acres, 100 units. 2 of them are in Oregon City, and we have 1 in Milwaukee. That's a Hillside Park that's across from the Providence Milwaukee Hospital. We also have the 9-story high-rise, which is another 100 units. So as part of our redevelopment plan, we're looking at selling, possibly selling the Oregon City properties, redeveloping the Park Place property along the lines of that Hope 6 development that was originally looked at for Oregon City, and then modernizing the high-rise. And we're looking at mixed income. Any kind of redevelopment we do, we want mixed income. We don't want them all to be low income. We want them to be all incomes. We then take the money that we get from the sale of the property in Oregon City and build other projects throughout the county, because we need housing in every community in the county. Molalla has housing issues too. They can't handle 200 units, but they could handle a 21-unit apartment complex.
What about, so Milwaukee's the only other city?
Well, those are the cities where we have the big parks, so that's 400 units. The other 150 units are scattered sites, and they're throughout the county. So,
Lake Oswego, Gladstone, Happy Valley,
well,
Milwaukee.
let's say that I would say that right now, to be honest, 75% of public housing is in Oregon City and Milwaukee. Yeah. But remember, that's 4. But there's 400 units. Gladstone, yes, we have some. Lake Oswego, we actually have an affordable project affordable to low-income seniors. So. But that's the goal, is to build those all over.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mengelberg?
Yes, thank you. It's an impressive array of services that you provide. Having worked at the county previously, there's a couple of programs that you didn't mention that might be part of the puzzle, and I don't know what the resources are now. One of them was a focus on energy efficiency, which could drive down the cost of housing. And the second one is your annual public oral auction. And I'm noticing here that last year there was several sites available in Oregon City for sale. So that may be a piece of the puzzle also. It was a piece of unimproved land, 0.27 acres combined, that was in Oregon City zoned R6. So it seems like You know, there are potentials of tax foreclosed properties that could be repurposed for this kind of
So, excuse
use.
me, the list that you're reading from, is that a list that's generated by the city?
No, it's Clackamas County.
Okay, so it is the
Public
county,
Works.
because, yeah, we generally get that, and we tend to look for property like that. Unfortunately, the property that we see is usually up in Welch's, which is not where, you know, we don't want, you know, they may need it, but that's not where we want to stick all the affordable housing. But thank you, we'll look into that closer.
So is there anybody else on the commissions that desire to speak or ask a question? Mr. Mahoney?
I'm overwhelmed. I think you guys are too. I think this issue is, you talk about economy of scale. Usually you're applying it in terms of economics, but just in terms of logistics, I don't see how this guy over here knows what that guy over there is doing, and there's no recognition of boundaries or limitations on housing, because eventually people are going to be on the streets, and then you're going to call them homeless. And we do have a homeless problem in the Portland metropolitan area. What I'm wondering is, why don't we have a meeting of the minds on a metropolitan basis and apply somewhat of a Marshall Plan to this whole issue of housing and homelessness, because they run together, and have Metro take the lead on this, so that everything can be coordinated and we don't have counties and cities and states and HUD all looking at this in a fragmented area. Now, I use the word fragmented because I know what you're trying to do is coordinate, but it seems to me like it's just an overwhelming problem to coordinate an issue. It's like herding cats. I don't understand how you do it, and you do it in a consistent way so that it's self-sustaining, and you've got a program that everybody recognizes how to administer it, and where the money is spent, and how it's spent, and when it's spent. So I'm wondering, why don't we just kick this up a notch and get Metro involved in this thing, and get them to be the tip of the spear, so that everybody can buy in on this and go that route. I may be oversimplifying this, but if I am, please tell me. I'm not going to speak for
Let's try to keep this short, okay?
Yeah, I don't have that much to say, although there was the fair share conversation that happened back in the 90s was at least an attempt to require that local jurisdictions do their fair share for affordable housing. I think I wasn't at Metro at that time, and I can't speak to it. I think the general perception is that that approach didn't work because there were no resources to go along with the mandates, and so if we want to have a regional conversation, there need to be resources around that. We were working closely with HUD on the work group that developed the 4-part framework we came up with, which is really a starting point for what we hope will be a longer conversation. And I think HUD is interested in that collaboration. At Metro, we don't have resources for investing in housing, so I think that's kind of the challenge for Metro to step into kind of leading a coordinated strategy. Is
You
that
don't really have a mandate in your charter either, do you?
it depends how you interpret that. Yeah. So there's a lot of flexibility in the Metro Charter, but it is an issue that's come up on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, and talk about the need for a kind of coordinated regional strategy. We've so far been looking at opportunities to coordinate resources and investments and how we could help convene a conversation, and that seems to be going in the direction of there are some regions that have created regional revolving loan funds for investing in equitable transit-oriented development. It doesn't need to be necessarily transit-oriented, but thinking about the kinds of places that you want to invest strategically, and you can use that strategy to bring together housing authority investments, federal funds, state funds, local incentive tools, tax credits, local tax exemptions, bringing foundations to the table, and then potentially, layering that public investment with some private low-cost debt, so that we can generate kind of some economies of scale on the resource side and use that to shape a kind of regional investment strategy. That would be one way to explore that issue, but yeah, I don't have I guess,
Thank you.
a full answer for you. Thanks.
So does anybody else on the commissions have a question? I have one citizen who wishes to speak. Is there something you wanted to say in closing?
Sure. I want to say thank you again for allowing us to come in and present with you and answer your questions, and also just let you know that we are fully prepared to work with your staff on a joint application in terms of the Metro Planning Grant. We would certainly enjoy that opportunity. We've already done a little bit of work with your staff on that, and we would, if the city decides to go ahead with that, we would really appreciate the opportunity for partnership.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you.
Thank you for all your
So,
speakers.
Mr. Edgar?
Do I know? Of course.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Paul Edgar. I'm coming before you trying to talk as a board member of Fort Kennedy, and we're talking about homeless veterans housing. We've been working on an issue to try to address possibilities because we see indeed it's an open wound. We have people that have served our country, they're living under tarps and in tents, and we've got to figure something better. And we've been looking at tiny houses and trying to create an encampment area. And we feel within the encampment area we can better localize and target services to address VA-type programs, mental health, addiction, and other services. But we came up with, and I'm trying to give you a written document that shows we did a little pricing of 20 units. We wanted to build them immediately under the size that we could build as a shed. So they're 200 square feet, and we said, this is what I went through at Fort Ord, California. And we would have 7-foot high walls. We could create a sleeping loft in it, a bedroom in it. They would be post and beam. All the windows and man doors and 2x6 construction. We could create these units framed up for $8,500 a unit. I could take and put 20 of those on 2 acres. And when I look at this, the total cost is $170,000 to create housing that for homeless veterans, I could literally put 4 veterans, dreaming a little bit, into 1 unit. Beggars not necessarily can be choosers, but if it's bad, but it's going to be a controlled environment. And the idea would be to try to create something affordable as shelters and transition housing, and then we could take these same units and put a addition off the back. Now I'm going outside of the plan, but where I could have a bathroom and a kitchen and things like that. But it is dreaming out loud with you and saying, what would we have to do to the code to allow something like this to happen? What would we have to do to try to create some type of thing so that I don't have $32,000 of SDC fees per unit? To try to create something that in a humanitarian mindset, what I'm doing is I'm putting a roof. I'm eliminating tarps and tents. And I'm trying to proactively transition people into a productive life.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're finished with this piece, and now we get to move on to marijuana regulations, 16-279. Mr. Conkle.
Really?
Does anybody need a break before we move on?
That's the only way that people are going to make it and be able to productive in the community.
He's mentioned it. No, I haven't talked to him.
One of the areas that
Keeps me
we were
awake.
talking about that we thought would actually be present is the old Quincy.
I can't even play Keno down.
The piping is still in the ground, but the pads and everything are still there. Even if all you did is put these houses on, and then build like shower rooms and a kitchen room.
I'm adding a mid-century addition.
Let's talk about it.
It's lays out the food truck.
Well, I've just got
And then it's kind of like this camp in Metro property.
But that's interesting. I mean, that's interesting.
Mine does like
No,
a
building
lean-to.
company and
It kind of comes
yeah,
off the edge, and
interesting.
I'm just going to put firewood in it.
You know, the infrastructure's already there for the sanitation. Only the best for you.
Yeah, and they probably love it. Look at that. See, we got a little walk. We don't get this much crap, do we? Yeah, I've been wanting to do it.
Not in print form.
Those two don't have it.
We can play it.
Yeah, well,
And Nancy, I had a lot of wrangling about the paper.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm a person who
I was
has
one of the
paper
last to do it, and I gave in, but I hate it.
Okay, we're going to move on.
I want to be able to.
Good evening, Mayor. Hold on one sec. So, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. So, on our last discussion, there's still more that we would like to bring back. We may do it at a Planning Commission work session and a City Commission work session. So, like I said, this was just the start. There's a lot of information out there. So, what we'd like to be able to do is come back to each of the commissions and talk about some of the stuff that we have in place now at the local level, what we've seen in our zoning code, and continue this discussion. So I guess I would just say that there is more to come on this.
Commissioner Mayward?
So my immediate concern is that there's a very short window to apply for this Metro grant. There's a pre-application meeting next week and then a deadline of like June to put together a proposal, and I didn't hear any consensus or discussion today, so I'm thinking we're going to, unless we move more quickly than that, we're not going to be able to apply.
Well, it's a pre-app. I think we'll have time to come back to the commission at a minimum to say, this is what we'd like to put forward, to bring that to you, so.
So it'd be really helpful from a staff perspective to hear what is possible in terms of financial resources and what's in the zoning code and what is low-hanging fruit from your perspective, since you're the experts on this.
Yep, and in the, believe in the narrative from staff, we walked through a couple of the options, so maybe if you have the opportunity, if out of all of the information tonight, there was some discussion of some of the opportunities that we had identified for potential grant application potential. So, Mr. Shaw.
That's where I was going to, is wondering what your time frame was and where you wanted our input at, so.
Yep, we'll work on that.
Am I going to have to separate you two?
I don't know. Possibly.
Mr. Walter?
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. So my goal tonight is to bring you up to speed on where the city is with respect to drafting reasonable regulations for time, place, and manner for marijuana businesses. And I've handed out a packet that includes some maps in the back. The maps in the back of the handout are not in the packet, though we will be referring to those maps on the screen. So currently, the city has a ban on marijuana businesses and has placed this issue on the ballot in November. And the intent of this, I'll just minimize this while I'm talking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just say switch that on, and then I'll refer to it. In order to develop time, place, and manner regulations in the event that the vote in November legalizes these locally, we are going through this process. It will be a legislative process. What we've prepared so far is a series of surveys and public outreach, and I'm going to report on that a little bit. My goal tonight is to try to clarify the questions in the survey, because I know some of you haven't had time to look at this and respond to me yet, but what I'd like to do is give you some additional time. And I think if you could get me responses by Friday via email or writing, that would be great. I do have a couple of responses from planning commissioners already, so I thank you for that. And we will go through that. Currently, we have a ban temporarily, and that ban would be continued in November if the voters decide to do that. And that's called an opt-out ordinance under the nomenclature. State law allows cities to do this, and the point of that is to give us some time to develop time, place, and manner regulations that make sense for Oregon City. And I'd also like to make the point that when we're talking about marijuana businesses and medical marijuana and recreational marijuana businesses, we need to be kind of neutral about the word marijuana in some ways, so that we can think of it not to belittle the fact that there are health and safety impacts and impacts on child facilities and proximity, those kinds of things. But in terms of it being a product or a retail product that we regulate under retail, it's helpful to think about it in a neutral manner. So I'd just like to say that as we begin this process. Currently, our business license ordinance will not allow the city to issue a business license to any business that's not in compliance with local, state, or federal law. So being that marijuana is a Schedule I federal regulated drug, we cannot issue business licenses in Oregon City. And there are some federal and law ramifications to this that we will probably want to discuss. In your packet, we also included 2 recent reports from the states of Colorado and Washington on the impact of marijuana legalization. They're both pretty long. They rely on a variety of sources, but they do have some good summary statistics, particularly with respect to upticks in usage by teenagers and adults, the impact on arrests and things of that nature, DUIs, concurrent things of that nature in those states. So that's good information. With respect to tax, we currently have adopted a 10% tax on the sale of recreational marijuana and 5% tax on medical marijuana, and that preceded the passage of Measure 91. Which Measure 91 allows cities and counties a 3% tax on recreational marijuana. So temporarily, if cities are legalizing these types of businesses, the taxes that they collect, that the state collects, range from 17 to 20% up to 25% this year, and those are dispersed according to according to the OLCC, who are estimating $10.7 million in revenue for the 2015-2017 biennium, with dispersal of 40% to the Common School Fund, 20% to mental health, alcoholism, and drug services, 15% to state police, 10% to cities for enforcement of the measure, and 10% to counties, and 5% to the Oregon Health Authority for alcohol and drug abuse prevention. The other aspect of House Bill 3400, which is the aspect that allows us to establish reasonable regulations. So that's what I'm going to go into in a little more detail. But first I'd like to share the results of the surveys, particularly survey number 2. So when we did the surveys, we designed them not so much to be scientifically or statistically valid, but to help frame the questions that we were going to ask as we went through the process. The first survey was open-ended, questions. We asked people to say if these types of businesses are permitted in Oregon City, where should they go? And we got all kinds of responses. You saw those in your packets. They're all over the board. You know, a lot of people are chiming in on the issue of if rather than where and that sort of thing, and what types of things. The second survey was the one that we presented at our open house 2 weeks ago, and I'll briefly go into what that reported back. So the first questions that we asked was with respect to retail sale of marijuana. And if retail sale of marijuana was permitted in Oregon City, where should it be allowed? The results are on page 4 of your handout. And a high percentage of people appear to indicate a preference for retail sale wherever retail sales are currently permitted. But a slightly smaller percentage would prefer to see it in commercial areas, but not downtown. Then we moved into production, and production of marijuana is defined as an entity licensed by the OLCC to manufacture, plant, cultivate, grow, or harvest marijuana. And a high percentage of respondents thought that production of marijuana be permitted wherever industrial manufacturing and processing is permitted. So it's not super conclusive there. Processing of marijuana is defined as taking raw marijuana and using it to make usable marijuana and marijuana-infused products, and to include packaging and labeling and those sorts of things. A lot of this is regulated by the OLCC already, the processors in particular. And a high percentage of respondents indicated a preference for processing to be confined to industrial areas. We asked what people felt about hours of operation. Hours of operation are regulated by the OLCC for liquor stores, and they would also be regulated separately for marijuana stores. That would depend on a lot of factors that the OLCC defines. Generally, people felt that those should be the same as for liquor stores or other retail type uses. Then we asked what other types of regulations should be considered with respect to time, place, and manner. These are the types of regulations that we would apply through permit processes and enforcement, such as limitations on public view, odor controls, confining marijuana production and processing to indoors only, school separation, and security measures. So people are generally supportive of these types of regulations, we found, for producers and processors. And then with respect to marijuana retail, very supportive of that as well. Now, with respect to what state law requires in terms of separation, currently state law requires a separation of 1,000 feet for marijuana retail from primary and secondary schools that are both private and public. But it allows for cities to adopt additional buffer requirements under their own regulations. So what we've included as reference in your packet are the City of Lake Oswego's packet. They are considering requiring buffers of 500 feet from state-registered childcare uses for marijuana facilities. And Paul can talk a little bit about this process as well. By comparison, Clackamas, and they're basing a lot of that on the Clackamas County ordinance, which has been adopted. Clackamas County applies buffers of 500 feet from childcare uses, 2,000 feet from schools, and 1,000 feet from parks and playgrounds. So one of the primary concerns related to marijuana retail businesses with respect to childcare is the potential for increased street crime associated with cash transactions, and that's been documented to a certain extent in Colorado and other places. Additional concerns including loitering, security, trash disposal, public view, odors, and other maintenance and nuisance issues are issues that can potentially be regulated through site design, policing, and enforcement. If the city were to apply 1,500 foot buffers around childcare uses, it would be much more limiting for marijuana retail stores. We also want to consider employment land and the effect of marijuana production, processing facilities, and wholesale and retail on local job creation, both directly and indirectly. So we know that there's a clear tax revenue boost, but what we don't know is what kind of jobs these facilities actually create. So we'd like to seek further information on this from what other cities are seeing in other states. We've heard concerns that such businesses would displace traditionally permitted businesses in those zones. Commercial, industrial, and employment land might be taken up or permanently displaced by such uses. In particular, in some of our lands where we have adopted concept plans but which don't have zoning and are not in the city yet, it's a consideration that we need to take into account. And finally, with respect to enterprise zones, it's not clear at this point whether marijuana facilities would be eligible for tax exemptions under the enterprise zoning, but we'll look at this in more detail and get back to you on it. I'd like to share with you some of the mapping that we've done. If we were to apply certain more restrictive buffers to marijuana retail in our cities, and what we've done is create 4 maps and 1 composite map. So this map is the map that we had at the open house, which we used as a the full screen.
Can you tell us what page that's in here? These are hard to...
Yeah, this is the very largest map in the very back of your packet. Yeah. So this map displays what the OLCC regulations would already apply. We've buffered existing schools with a 1,000-foot ring to indicate where retail marijuana facilities would not be licensed by the OLCC.
Under the 1,000-foot.
Under the 1,000-foot rule. This map is also indicating our comprehensive plan designations, which we've adopted. So potentially, if the city were to not permit any marijuana production or processing or any kind of retail in our residential areas, that's a significant amount of the city that is off limits. So we're going to talk about that. We can see that we've got the Beaver Creek Road concept plan area, which is not zoned yet, and part of that would be already within the OLCC buffer of the high school.
Pete, what schools are downtown there where the biggest concentration of circles are?
Well, a combination of private and public schools, some associated with churches and some associated with a school district.
So you got St. John's, you got Berkeley, the old Jackson campus, the preschool that's next to Atkinson Church. Well, when you start going 1,000 feet as the crow flies,
It goes,
Right. So the
Sure. We've had this discussion many times.
hit escape. There we go. Okay. The next map that we've put together is a map that indicates what a 2,000-foot buffer and around parks and playgrounds, a 1,000-foot buffer around 2,000-foot buffer around schools, 1,000-foot buffer on parks and playgrounds and childcare. 500-foot would pretty much restrict potential commercial and industrial zoning to areas along Beaver Creek Road and along the landfill. And if the city decides to further restrict marijuana retail to only areas that are strictly commercial and not to areas that allow residential use, this could be further restricted. So this is a composite map of what would happen if we did adopt regulations similar to Clackamas County.
Well,
Yep.
let me just say, it seems to me that if we assume that the voters pass this in November and we're going to have retail, that it is, at least in my opinion, we have to treat these folks pretty much like any other business. And I think pulling something like that out of the hat that virtually takes away any opportunity for those people to have a business is, you know, it's not something I'm interested in.
Right. And we had that same concern as well. The next map, so that I'm just going to show you briefly, and you can look at these as you're, over the next 2 days as you're thinking about your survey responses. Hit escape, thanks. So, this is the map that indicates the active parks and playground buffer of 1,000 feet. So these are parks that have actual play equipment or ball fields in them. Yeah.
What's the point of including parks?
Well, child proximity areas. That's the concern. Yeah, areas where children congregate.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And part of the regulations that Lake Oswego is considering and Clackamas County has already adopted and have an additional separation requirement from those areas.
Is that for
Yeah.
sale or growing? But anybody can smoke it anywhere, it's just not in a public
Sale. So
building.
That's for retail, right?
Yeah, retail. Yeah, yeah. So
There's
yes,
some green areas on this map that
Mhm.
aren't surrounded by a buffer.
correct. Those are not active park type situations. They're considered passive recreational. That was what we used to make the decision on what to buffer and what not. But if we were to, additional buffers around passive recreational zones would further restrict it. So that's not something we've contemplated doing yet. I just wanted to show this as a graphic. So the other thing I wanted to do this evening is just to go through the survey and clarify the questions that we're asking you.
Can you do that speedily?
Very briefly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the questions that we're asking have to do with marijuana production, marijuana processing, marijuana wholesale, marijuana retail, and the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program. And the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program is administered by the Oregon Health Authority, not by the OLCC. Card-holding patients, growers, processors, and dispensaries are subject to certain requirements under the Oregon Health Administration. The city may adopt reasonable regulations on medical marijuana grow operations. So that's something that we wanted to ask people questions about. We've asked 24 questions in these 5 areas. And I've gotten some pretty clear responses back from 2 of you already. So it's,
Pete, is this
yeah.
a questionnaire only for us commissioners, or is it a general
Good question.
public too?
These questions are going to form the basis for survey number 3 that we're going to put on the web, and it will be much more directed survey with zoning maps that show clearly what these regulations would affect in terms of that
So
sort
you
of
have
thing.
another open house after?
Well, we will try to get in another open house before we draft regulations and to share this information if we are able to. Otherwise, we'll definitely include the results on our website.
Will
for
there be
sure.
also another online that the public can take?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
Pete, what kind of respondents did you get for survey number 2?
Survey number 2, I think we had close to 160 responses. Yeah, yeah, so far. And
Is that still active?
no, survey number 2 closed at the end of April. So yeah.
Questions for Pete?
One more. Pete, did I hear you right when you referred to the city's not able to issue a business license unless the applicant's in compliance with federal law?
Correct.
And federal law says that
Yeah, these are illegal. So
it's illegal. So isn't this a moot question?
Well, no, because we're voting on changing that in November in the charter.
Yeah. So
No, it's not a charter amendment. It would change the current ordinance, the current business license ordinance, correct?
No, that'd be a separate, so potentially, there's a couple things going on right now. One is, we have a moratorium in place, and the local jurisdiction is going to go to a vote in November to decide whether we want to legalize all marijuana retail manufacturing distribution in Oregon City. Okay, there's a second issue that's related to our business license. Right now, if you don't comply with federal law, we will not issue a business license. There's multiple court cases on this moving through the system. Ours is on a stay, waiting to see what happens with the vote. But that is a policy decision we're going to have to come back and have a discussion at some point about.
But we think it's likely that ordinance, or that one of the city's ordinances, will be overturned in some jurisdiction sometime in the coming months.
That's why we're going through the process.
Right.
Is an ordinance different than the charter?
Yes.
Because 2 years ago, I remember sitting out here when they passed the tax, the city commission, and they said our charter says we follow state and federal laws, and that federal trumps the state law. And so
I don't think it was a charter.
No, it wasn't.
requirement.
It's not. It doesn't say that in the charter.
It doesn't? I thought sure that's what they said that evening. Okay, my mistaken.
You know, another policy issue we'll be bringing back is, when we passed the 10% and the 5% tax on recreational and medicinal marijuana, and then state law came in and put a cap on that. And so, one of the arguments is, are we grandfathered in because our tax was in place prior to state law, or do we just send the 3% to the voters? So that's another issue that we'll be bringing back for discussion that potentially may need to go on the November ballot. So there are a couple concurrent things happening at the same time as it relates to recreational marijuana.
Well, that confused the public when they see so many questions. Do you want to approve it for sale? Do you want to have the tax? This and that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess one would have to be before the other to let them determine, before they talk about taxes, if they even want it.
Well, isn't it an issue that if we get our house in order and everything seems to be logical, that the feds could still say, oops, you're still wrong?
They couldn't do that in Colorado or Alaska or Washington.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking.
I think that, Bob, I think the likelihood is the feds see the handwriting on the wall, and they're just going to back off on this issue.
They're just not going to enforce it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another 8 states that are voting on some form of legalization in this election cycle. At least some of those will undoubtedly pass. So at some point, there's a tipping point where, the feds just can't stop it.
Then there's the other side of the coin, and the voters in Oregon City says, not in my backyard.
Then we're losing money to Gladstone and Milwaukee, where every time I go 99, they're just...
Well, if it boils down to a money issue, then there's no question, let's just do it.
We've invited the OLCC staff to the June 7th City Commission work session.
Okay.
To talk about that. And they're going to talk about the testing process and how they do the seed to sale monitoring and all of that.
So maybe if I could just have Chief Band.
Oh, really?
3 minutes. Just one little consideration that is a little bit unique, and it was just
Name, title for the record.
Jim Band, I'm the police chief. The one place where, kind of, Mr. Mayor, to what you had said about a business is a business, if it's legal, or you're going to give it restrictions outside of. The one thing I'll say that is a little bit unique on, that I'm probably most nervous about, actually has to do with producers and processing sites. And where those go, I will assume, we can only assume that everybody is going to get a business license. What I'm probably most worried about are the places that may not get a business license. If somebody's brewing beer, nobody's going to go in and steal more than about $50 beer because you can't carry that much. You can carry a lot of marijuana. You know, it's a commodity that's worth a lot of money. So whatever that, and I cannot remember what is in there, if there's something in there about producers being in residential areas.
Yes, it says no. The state law says it's
and we can potentially pass a local.
Because there's currently growers in, there's medical growers, pretty substantial growers in residential areas now inside Oregon City. So that's the only consideration, that wherever we go with time, place, and manner, that is a producer consideration.
I think we have a harder time with the medical marijuana program than we have with the recreational program as far as grow sites, because that's the way they originally set up that program, was to have private people grow for patients. I think on the commercial side, you know, this is, if you go to Colorado or Washington, this is an industry. And the people who are getting into this are getting into it with hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I don't foresee a real problem with, you know, growers especially trying to skirt the law and not be registered and not have a business license, because I think there's a lot of money to invest to be able to be successful at it.
There is, but in the same way, there's Lithia Subaru, who's they got a lot of money to sell Subarus. There's Bob's Subaru guy on, you know, there's still going to be other people who are trying to do it, make a quick buck on a smaller budget. So that was way less than 3 minutes.
Okay, so before we have, oh, go ahead, sure.
So along those lines, in terms of enforcement, what happens if we have an industrial company in Oregon City that has some excess space and sees this as another business opportunity? How would you regulate that? If they're, you know, an approved business now for their use, and they're just adding a new business line to their portfolio.
I'm not sure that, you know, I don't think that's really probably a police question so much as, you know, planning and how it's zoned and that kind of stuff. I'm worried about people robbing people, you know.
Right, and I think we have, you know, in this time, place, and manner discussion, we have a serious section on, you know, what physical security is, what electronic security is, odor control, all of those kinds of things have to be addressed.
And encouraging them to be above board, and that we're receptive, because the worst thing that could happen if we respond to a burglary somewhere and it's just a warehouse, we respond a certain way. If we know that it's a marijuana somewhere where they're growing, where we know there's potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars a pot in there, we're going to look at it a little bit different, because who could be inside of there? It could be inherently more dangerous than somebody who was, you know, just breaking into a shop or something like that.
There's actually stock on the National Stock Exchange I bought for warehouses who buy warehouses and then lease it back to people to grow. And then there's security agents. There's all these different stocks right now on the stock exchange. So I agree, the federal government's seeing the right in the law.
And that's your question.
It's maybe just more of a red flag for whoever the
Very
right
good point.
Well, I think it's thinking about it. Well, as much as we would like to say it's widgets and widgets and widgets, and they're all retail. It's not. You know, I think that you have the opportunity here to think about the potential impacts and the concerns, and the state law gives you the ability to regulate that, to make sure that you're putting in the proper time, place, and manner regulation specific to this use, because it is somewhat unique. It's not selling soda.
Right. And I think also, especially when we're talking about growing and processing, you know, we have to understand that there are a lot of different kinds of industries that do stuff that may be dangerous, or gold processors that need extra security, folks who make ammunition. So there are regulations concerning those folks, and so if we have regulations about the processing and growing of marijuana, say, let's take the craziest idea, Benchmade has an extra warehouse and they want to start doing that, they would still have to meet all of those other regulations concerning before we would let them operate.
Well, they have to go through the OLCC, all those regulations.
Sure. Yeah.
And permits, and that's
There's
a
a lot
very
of state
lengthy
regulation.
process.
I know, one second. So, before we continue this discussion, is there anybody in the audience who had something to say? Could you? Yeah, if you come up, and then after you're done, if you'll fill out a card in the back for the city recorder so she has your information.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. I hadn't planned on speaking tonight, but thank you for the invitation. I'm a business owner here in Clackamas County.
I'm sorry, name for the
Mario Mamone.
Okay.
And I've lived here in Oregon since, I got out of the Army, way back out of Vietnam. And I worked for the Forest Service for a number of years, but after I retired, I decided to open a business, and it turned out to be a marijuana business. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would do that, but I did. And we've been operating in Clackamas County since 2011, down on McLaughlin Boulevard, by Advanced Auto Parts. Never had an issue. We went through the permitting process when we first opened up with Clackamas County. We got a permit to have a dispensary there. And now we're applied through OLCC. We've, like I say, been there a long time. We have 14 employees. Minimum wage is about $12, $16 an hour for some of our supervisors. We're looking at hiring a few more people. Our gross revenues are over $1 million a year. So we're a legitimate business. And I operate a legitimate business, and never would we think about breaking the rules because our livelihood is based on following the rules. We have more rules and regulations and security systems than any other business probably in all of Oregon City. I would encourage you to come visit, come and spend 20 minutes with us, take a look at what our facility looks like, our customers, our employees, look at our security systems, and then you'll have a better way to make an informed decision of what our businesses are like.
What's the name of your business?
Maritime Cafe.
Okay.
What really hurts us is the idea, as I looked at the Lake Oswego proposal, and it effectively closed out the whole city, so there's no opportunity to run a good business. And I'm afraid that Oregon City might do that as well. I was really pleased to hear that there's much more of an open attitude here. And we'll see how that proceeds. But marijuana businesses, producers, and growers are business people just like anyone else. We didn't jump in this because we're stoners. We saw a business opportunity, and that's what we're here for. And I think we would be a valuable asset to Oregon City in many ways, financially, as employers. And I think, too, if you were to look at the literature, the RAND Corporation, LA Police, and a couple of universities did some studies on marijuana and the effects of marijuana on the local populations and crime. And every one of those studies showed that crime was reduced when the marijuana dispensaries came in. So I think there's this perception that we're crime related, but really we're not. And I think that if the planning department has a chance to do some of that homework and look at some of those studies, they'll see that the literature is pretty clear on that. And what we hear is just fear-mongering, because it was an illegal drug and there was a lot of illegal things that happened. But so was alcohol. There was a lot of murders and a lot of killings going on with alcohol until it was made a legal product. And then all of a sudden it just became part of our society. I think, too, is regulations for liquor stores. We're looking at liquor stores in Oregon, not this election, but maybe someplace down the road, allowing liquor to be stolen at Fred Meyer's. So we can see that we have opportunities to control, monitor, and allow us to be effective members of the community.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service in Vietnam, soldier.
Thank you.
Sir? Okay. All right. So we're back on to our commissioners, Commissioner McGriff.
So Jennifer or Tony, if this does not pass, what are the implications in November? And then the second question is that just for the record, I want to support definitely buffers around parks and schools, because I don't think I wouldn't want a liquor store near a park or a school either. So it's no different to me. But and also I've been talking to staff about the fact that there are medically fragile people that do not tolerate or deal with odors, so I'm really hoping that we'll be looking at some of those things in our code. I've looked at several that have been online, and they seem reasonable, so self-contained works.
Tony? Well, if the voters vote against legalizing it, it would be the local opt-out option.
Okay.
It would be illegal in Oregon City.
Okay, just wanted that clarified, thank you.
But people can still grow it in the city.
That wasn't my question.
And this is dealing with retail.
Yes.
Recreational, not medicinal. Two different programs.
Commissioner May.
Yeah, I guess my question's for Pete, since he ended up all the way in the back. Oh, he's got a mic.
He's got a mic.
You know, the maps are nice, but I would really like to see a map with the state law, not if we decide on this or if we decide, but right now, based on the law, you know, no residential, black those out. No, you know, so many feet away from the school, black those out. So that we see where the law exists now, and then decide whether or not there's any reason for us to modify it.
Did that.
I haven't seen
2000. I think with respect to the residential prohibitions, yeah, we can do a
Yeah, I agree with you.
Well, yeah, so, you know, from that's where I'd like to start
Yeah.
from, so at some point, if you can get that out.
Yeah, okay. We will do
You know,
that.
just for each of, because each one has a different kind of set of reg, and
Yeah, and
so.
that begs a larger question of, does the city want to consider mixed-use areas which allow apartment use
Right.
as retail potential or not as well? So-
Yeah, but, you know, if we've got buffer zones around stuff and already exclusionary zones, we need to know where those are, because some of the mixed use is gonna be near a school, so it's gonna be buffered out already. So,
Yeah.
we need to know where the baseline is before we even decide to do any modification, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
That's it.
Anybody else? Commissioner Pauly.
Isn't the map at the very last, isn't that 100-foot buffer?
100 foot?
1,000
I mean,
foot.
1,000.
That just shows the OLCC buffers from schools, but it should, the underlying residential areas are shown in the comprehensive plan, so there's an assumption that it's not permitted there. Yeah.
Mr. Mingenberg?
I guess my concern about the latest comment around restricting around apartment development is that typically apartments cluster around the main corridors, which is where the
Correct.
retail spaces would be, and so you would effectively eliminate most of the areas where someone could sell their
Right.
product.
I was going to say, I think most
Go ahead.
sales are usually on a retail spot. I don't think anyone's going to put up a store next to a park or next to a school. They want someplace where there's traffic, like there's a House of Pipes up here on Malala.
Which is actually inside 1,000 feet from the school.
My point.
Yeah, that would greatly restrict.
Yeah, that's
Father Time?
Never gets old. Let me know some stuff here. Peter?
I'll get it.
Mr. Mayor and distinguished commissioners, my name is William Gifford. I live in Oregon City, and I just had a couple of brief comments. One is, Mr. Mayor, you had mentioned business is a business is a business, but I think, and I'm a businessman, that there are some distinctions, and one distinction would be the distinction that is made with a liquor store, for example, is a very different business. So that's one point that I want to make. There is a distinction between types of businesses, and a business that is controlled by state regulations, such as liquor stores, has a different color to it.
All right.
The second comment that I wanted to make is we do have the distribution of liquor in our city, and despite the fact that I know a lot of people in Oregon City that drink. Surprise. There's only one liquor store in town.
Right.
My suspicion is when when the vote is cast, and if the citizens of Oregon City agree that there could be a retail outlet in Oregon City, my suspicion is there'll only be one, and that one will most likely be right next to the liquor store. And because that's already zoned for it, it's already there. I can't imagine that there's going to be retail stores popping up all over town in every neighborhood. It's just the laws of competition, for one thing, are going to drive it down. I was just pointing out to Chief Band an article in the Washington Post last week about the price of marijuana in the state of Washington and how it has just plummeted. Now that it's legal, competition is driving the price down tremendously, both wholesale and retail. I'll forward you a copy of that article if you'd like to read it. But I'm just suggesting there are differences in businesses, and I don't think there's going to be a plethora of distribution points in Oregon City, and we already have a model of what the OLCC has done with the liquor store in Oregon City.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think what I do disagree with is somehow including parks. I get the schools thing, okay? But when you start including parks and other things, it looks like we are specifically trying to prevent this from happening anywhere. And if our voters say we want to have it, if that's what the voters say, then we have to produce reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, not unreasonable time, place, and manner. And, you know, there are, I don't know how many bars on Main Street.
Sorry, my time is running out.
That's fine.
Excuse me for interrupting you while you're chewing up my time, sir. But that wasn't my point.
Are you done?
My point was distribution.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, believe that or not. The competition is just, like I go along 99, just driving back and forth from Portland, they're almost every other
That will
block.
settle down, and I'll send that article to you. At first, the price peaks, and then it just drops out, and nobody wants to get into a business where they're not making money.
You're right.
So my point remains the same, that whether you're talking about the liquor store or bars, these are storefront businesses that don't display their wares. So I'm not sure how much effect you're going to have on you know, kids can walk by the liquor store, go into the pizza place. So I just don't know that it is as dire a circumstance as folks would like to think it is. That's my 2 cents.
We all have differences of opinion.
Well,
You can't stop
that'd be
from
the
down
first
there.
time.
You gotta come up.
Got to be official now.
Don't you have to show your driver's license every time you come in?
I have a feeling when you overregulate
Name,
sometimes.
you need to give your name.
Hey, Bernice, I'm running this meeting, thank you.
My name's Joe Russo. I have a feeling when you overregulate some things, sometimes it can work against the city's interest too, in location, you know? As far as your residents, they probably want either, if they vote to pass it, a convenient location that works for them in a commute, and not necessarily just in these little tiny pockets that fit some really regulated, you know, zoning areas.
Thanks, sir.
Just an input.
And I asked him the question, don't you need a driver's license to go in there every single time? So that's pretty much regulating it. Is there a door or something in between where they go in and?
When you get in, you show your driver's license.
Can you come up with the microphone?
I've never been there, so I don't know.
You have to show your driver's license twice. When you come into the building in the reception area, you show your driver's license, and then when you do the transaction, before you actually complete the transaction, you show your driver's license.
So the reception area is separate from the display area?
Yeah, it's, the doors have to be closed at all times between the two because of OLCC regulations.
And there's no windows?
No windows, no. We have windows in our doors, but we close them so you can't see them. When you look in through the main windows, all you see is a reception area, and that's all.
And that's a OLCC anywhere where there's a dispensary,
Yes,
correct?
right. We're not allowed to put marijuana pictures or any of that kind of stuff out there either.
Did you show your driver's license to verify your age or your identity, or?
It's both. Primarily for your age, that you're 21 or older, but also it has to have fit who you are. You know, it's got to be a legal ID for you.
Why?
He's medical, so they have the medical card also.
Why do you have to know who I am if I'm going to buy your product?
Because track them. OLCC or OHA regulations state that it has to be licensed with a physical description and a picture of you.
Just like buying a pack of cigarettes or a six-pack of beer.
And just like alcohol.
Otherwise, some 18-year-old person can come in with a fake license and get it, so it has to.
I live too sheltered a lot.
All right, has anybody got anything else to say on this before we move along? Jamie, did Katie put that presentation of mine on the agenda?
Yes.
So I'm going to flip through. I have been attending the governor's, I was appointed to the governor's task force on reopening the Willamette Falls locks. We've had our, this was our 4th or 5th meeting. I'm going to flip through a quick PowerPoint presentation on that was provided to us from Andy Cotugno at Metro this last Monday, and it just talks about a few of the things that are going to happen in order to make this happen.
Having that on the desktop.
I used to serve at that.
I don't know if this is page 1 or page 2. Why is my screen doing this?
It's hers is too.
It's good from here.
Our screens are blanking off and on.
Okay, so let's just move on. This is impossible.
Mine went off too.
I'll go out there. It'll be easier.
Do you want to sit here? It's right here.
Is yours staying stable?
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Listen in
Oh, you're doing a presentation.
So, basically, the Senate Bill 131 gave us this ability to have this task force to talk about reopening the locks. And we're just looking to establish a range of possible models for ownership, operation, and financing, and to assess the state's interest in taking on the locks are recommended to remain in core ownership. Oh, that's the wrong button. There we go. So there are several options, and one thing I have talked about, the Corps doesn't want to keep it, and if they do keep it, they aren't going to maintain it. So at some point, it's going to deteriorate into nothing. So we're going to have to find a way to put together a group, whether it's local governments, Metro, the state, working together as a unit, or putting together a nonprofit, or some other way to move this along. So we see these ownership from the Corps. Without a funding contribution, there's not going to be any change, and that would come from the federal government, and the feds aren't interested in appropriating more money for the locks because they don't have any, what they say, reasonable commercial value anymore. So even with the contribution of capital, they might repair it, but it wouldn't change the operations of the locks. And with if they were to appropriate capital and some operating costs, it would still be unreliable operation, and the only way we're going to get commercial use back from Wilsonville Concrete Products and others is by having the locks be in reliable operation. So if the locks are transferred, we have to designate a lead agency, we have to identify funds, we have to do negotiation of transfer agreement with the Corps, the completion of the Corps' final disposition study, which is a 3-year work product. So we're starting right now just to go through this 3-year process to figure out, what their final disposition study is going to say. And then Congress would have to actually authorize divestiture to someone else, whether it's to the city or to a group, Westland, who knows. So there's a lot of other things that they're having to go on. So we've been working on so this is what the disposition study is looking at. So the defining alternatives, the engineering costs and evaluation, the need for dredging, evaluation of the deterioration and risks and liabilities, the economic benefits and impacts, toxic materials assessment. So there's all this stuff, all this huge amount of work that's going to have to be done. A lot of it's very technical. we don't really think about toxic materials, but the canal that's on the upper side of the locks has been used as an industrial site for a long time, and they've had paper products come in and out off barges and chemicals and all kinds of other things, so they don't really know what might be in the sediment that's in the canal. Is transfer the only so here's where I shot some people down. So deauthorization by Congress, decommissioning, removing the gates, and disposing of it as surplus property. I really let them have it and said that is not an alternative. The reason it's still on the list, however, is because the costs of doing that work might be appropriated in a different manner to be able to be part of the repair or part of the transfer. So let's say it cost $8 million to tear it all down and fill in the canal and all that. That's a balancing factor for another alternative. So they might transfer to an alternate federal agency, but I don't see another agency that would be excited about taking it. They're talking about the park system, but I don't think the National Park System wants to have something like this. But we're talking about all kinds of different things. Well, I'm not even going to show you that. So these are some of the agencies that may have some interest or whatever in the locks. The tribes, ODOT, Oregon Parks, the Marine Board, the Division of State Lands, Ports, Metro, Clackamas County, Westland, and obviously Oregon City for the Willamette Falls Legacy Project. And just the amount of history that is there at the locks. The other thing that isn't on this list is we have to remember that the locks have been designated a National Historic Landmark, and so there's some things that can't be done even if the feds would like them to be done. So, Tom?
What you just said, they're designated a National Historical?
Yes.
And it seems to me, I sat on the Willamette Falls Heritage Foundation, so did Rocky for a while, and I know they were trying to get them going. You would think, isn't that the only way to go from lower to upper, and they'd want to preserve that and make it functional?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why all of us are sitting around this table month after month, trying to go down this road of how do we make sure that we preserve the locks and get them back into working order.
Instead of disposing of them?
Well, again, I think everyone gets the idea that disposing of them is not an option. But because of the way the federal government works, they would say, well, it's going to cost us $8 million to tear it all out and fill it in. So instead of doing that, we'll give that money to whoever this group is to help fund the ongoing operation or the repairs or whatever it may be. So they've talked about several different theoretical funding models, and they talked about a Willamette River Valley District, which would go all the way from Portland down to Eugene. They've talked about a Willamette Falls Heritage Area boundary for a taxing district, which goes basically from, I can't see the southern end, but around Oregon City and Lake Oswego all the way a few miles downriver. And then a smaller district like here. What we have asked for is that the county and Metro come back with some actual numbers about how big those districts are, what it would look like at 1 cent per thousand or 2 cents per thousand. The working theory is that the locks to be repaired is somewhere in the $3 to $5 million range, and operations are somewhere from $300,000 to $500,000 a year to be operating them at approximately 5 days a week. And Wilsonville Concrete Products is the one driving private force behind this, and that's their model. They say you have to operate at least 5 days a week to be able to make it commercially functional, and in order for us to make it recreational functional as well. So the river system is only good for, like, say, stern wheelers and anything that is a fairly deep draft, only down to about I want to say about 20 miles south of Canby. So it doesn't get you very far. So in the long term, as far as wanting to like be able to do scenic tours to Salem or stuff like that, there would be a lot of paperwork because you'd have to do dredging in the river, and the guy from Wilsonville Concrete Project, can't remember his name, but he says he's been working in the river forever, has worked on our locks since the 1960s, and he says that getting an in-water permit to dredge in the Willamette River is virtually impossible these days. So generally speaking, that's kind of, I kind of brought you sort of up to speed on what we've been talking about at the locks, and we're going to continue moving forward. And with the understanding of former Governor Roberts is the convener, and we have folks from all of the agencies, both cities, Metro, Clackamas County, the forest or the state parks, Tourism Oregon. Just all the different players are in the room, all working and the Army Corps of Engineers, all working towards this goal of finding a way to make that happen. And so I just wanted to give you a quick update on that. They wanted us to come back to our agencies and let you know that. So.
And we also have a locks working group, which is from the county and includes many different people, including me from the city, in addition to the task force. So there's lots of heads on this and thinking, and we all realize how important it is. So,
Damon?
I guess the one thing I'd say about any sort of special taxing district is that's an impact on the cost of affordable housing. Because that's more money that somebody has to pay in order to have a house.
Well, understand that this is very preliminary, and certainly there were people in the room who,
comes out in the water.
Got all freaked out as soon as you saw a new taxing district. That's a very difficult thing to accomplish.
Yeah.
That would be a really heavy lift. So we're looking at all kinds of different ways to make this go on. Commissioner Megaberg?
Question about the taxing district. You'd be thinking about property taxes then, right?
Yes.
And how would farm tax deferral be?
I have no idea.
Because quite a bit, I mean, if depending on how far south you go, a lot of the
Yeah, this is beyond preliminary. I mean, it's this was just they're just throwing some stuff out. We're a long ways from getting towards anywhere near, we're still looking at just what the numbers might generate and what that might look like. So I think we're a long way from policy questions like that. Anybody else? Is there anything else for the good of the order?